Father, give us ears to hear, eyes to see, and hearts ready to be transformed. By the time we leave here at the end of the night, let us be more equipped to live like you. Help us be ever closer to you. And let us be part of the solution that this world needs. In your name we pray. Amen. Okie dokie. So, today, 2 Kings chapter 25. Kind of a monumental moment for us because we've been going through 1st and 2nd Kings for quite some time now, with some different things in between. So in between 1st and 2nd Kings, we went through 1 Peter, right? And then as we've been going through 2nd Kings, we've also been doing overviews of the prophets, the pre-exilic prophets in particular, just so that we can kind of figure out where they fit in the chronology of stuff. And the game plan going forward is that next week we're going to do Nahum, mainly because I forgot to do that one at some point. So Nahum technically took place about 200 years before the time period we're at right now, but I forgot to go through it with us, and so we're going to do that next week. And then Sean's going to lead us through Jeremiah, not like one verse at a time, because that would take a very, very long time. We're going to do an overview of Jeremiah over the course of a few weeks, and then we're going through Daniel, and we're going to do a deep dive in Daniel, which will be fun. And slowly but surely we're making our way to the end of the Old Testament, so that eventually, maybe like a year from now or something like that, we can actually get to one of the Gospels. Which will be cool because that's been like a multiple year journey, starting from in Judges, like 5 or 6 years ago, which will be kind of cool. It kind of makes me sad that we didn't start with like the Torah itself. Like it's like whatever, it's fine. Anyways, we're in 2 Kings 25. Could somebody maybe just give us like a rundown of like what's been going on in 2 Kings? Really, chapters 24 and 25, like they're really just one long chapter because they're kind of one contained story. But what's been going on in 2 Kings?
Well, as of right now, we're, still in, I guess not really the divided monarchy, but at some point there was a divided monarchy with Judah and Israel, but a while back Israel got destroyed, sent into exile. So we've been dealing just with Judah, and we've really just been seeing a slow decline in their culture. And at this point, God's already said that he's going to send the Babylonians, and as of last chapter, we started seeing that happen.
Yeah. And so really, like I said, chapter 24 and 25 kind of go together because basically it's just like a really long destruction story, which is just sad. After hundreds and hundreds of years of God being gracious, finally his grace has come to an end, and he has said, Judah, it's time to meet your maker, basically, which is ironic because the whole point of Israel existing was to meet their maker. But they didn't do that. Instead, they were constantly chasing after other gods. They were constantly pursuing sin. And so God says, all right, time to discipline you. And he's going to send them into captivity for 70 years. So he's not done with them. But 2 Kings is going to end on it's actually going to end on a hopeful note, as we'll see. But it's not going to end on a triumphant note. It's going to end in a very sorrowful place. And so as we go through this chapter, I really want us to take intentional steps towards reading this chapter as its original audience would have read it, right? Because for us, it's very easy for us to read this like, thousands of years removed. I mean, these events took place like 2,500 years ago, right? It's easy for us to read it and be like, oh, it's just another thing that happened to Israel. But for the people who originally read this book, this was their most recent like history, right? I mean, it seems to imply that like the way the book ends would seem to suggest that the people reading it were still in captivity, right? Because it doesn't mention them returning, right? And so it would seem to suggest that these are people who are living in captivity, and therefore everything they're reading about in the chapter we're going through tonight is basically a message to them of all the things they did wrong.
It's like maybe a generation.
Yeah. So like this is literally the stuff that happened to their parents, and they're having to look and they're having to confront the fact that our parents really messed up. God takes sin very seriously. And this is what it means to be the chosen people of God, right? I think there's a tendency within churches nowadays to distance ourselves to where we're like, oh yeah, well, that's how God dealt with the Jewish people in the Old Testament. But like, now that we're under Jesus, nothing bad ever happens to us. And it's like, that's not true, right? There is punishment for sin. And also, we're not guaranteed lives free from hardship, even if you're not sinning. But I just want to like try to sober our minds, read it from the perspective of a people living in captivity as a direct result of the things we've read about over the last few chapters, if that makes sense. That being said, and I think it's also, it's helpful that we've gone through the prophets too, because the prophets are the ones who really let us see, like, they let us get our feet on the ground of the culture at the time, right? Because like First and Second Kings just give us like an overview, like literally like a single chapter can span 100 years.
It's like a history class.
Yeah. Whereas when you read the prophets, you get to see like the day-to-day activities where like the prophets are coming and they're saying like, guys, like, what does God ask of you but to just like do justice and love mercy and like walk humbly, like just live for God, right? And so it's kind of helpful when you see that and then you counter it by what they're doing, right? That being said, we've got what is it 30 verses in 2 Kings 25? I think that's right.
Yeah.
So we got 10 more verses than last week. I think we can do it. Maybe. We'll see.
We got it.
Alright, Sean, take it away. First 7 verses.
Now in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came, he and all his military force, against Jerusalem. And he camped against it, and built a siege wall all around it. So the city came under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so strong in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate, between the 2 walls beside the king's garden, through the Chaldeans, though the Chaldeans were all around the city. And they went by way of the Arabah. But the military force of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his military force was scattered from him. Then they seized the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they spoke their judgment on him. And they slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. Then he blinded the eyes of Zedekiah and bound him with bronze fetters and brought him to Babylon.
Yay! So, as you can see, very positive chapter ahead of us. What happens here? Just like, big overview.
King's captured and sent to Babylon.
Yeah.
Tried to escape.
Captured and blinded and sent to Babylon. So, is this a triumphant moment for the nation? No. This is the death of the nation. Right? This is literally the end. Like, this is, like, the events that we're seeing right here are events that the Jewish people still commemorate to this day. Mm-hmm. If you've ever heard, I mean, we haven't quite gotten there yet. We're going to get that into the in the following verses. But these events are going to take place on a day known as the 9th of Av, right? Like according to the Hebrew calendar. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be an entire book of the Bible that is written in response to the events that took place on this day. Again, it's really starting in verse 8 onwards. Anybody know what book is written in response to this? It's written by Jeremiah, but it's not the book of Jeremiah.
Oh, Lamentations.
Lamentations, right? And it is a book where he is literally lamenting, right, the fall of Jerusalem. And even to this day, every single year, the Jewish people commemorate the 9th of Av. It's like the darkest day, like, of their yearly calendar. And so these events right here are huge. This is when their captivity officially kicks off, and it doesn't end, right? That's the scary part, right? They think it's going to go on for 70 years, and they're going to come back to the land after 70 years, but things are not going to be the same until this guy named Jesus rolls around about 500 years later. So anyways, let's walk through it. Now, in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his military force, against Jerusalem. And he camped against it and built a siege wall all around it. Alright, is this the first time that we have seen Nebuchadnezzar lay siege to Jerusalem? No. When did it happen before?
Chapter 24.
Yeah, in the last chapter. And that was about 10 years earlier. So somebody remind me, what has Nebuchadnezzar done so far to the Jewish people?
So he has already taken a portion of them into exile, as well as the king who preceded Zedekiah, and he was the one who actually put Zedekiah on the throne.
Yes. Yeah, so basically there have been 2 waves of deportation so far, right? The first one came in 605 BC, I believe it was. And that was the wave, like, whenever you read about, like, Daniel and his, like, buddies, Rabshak, Meshach, and Abednego and stuff, they were part of that first deportation, right? Basically the king showed up, or, like, the Babylonians showed up in Jerusalem. They took all, like, the royal people and the young people and the wealthy people and the influential people. They took them captive and marched them off to Babylon, right? Daniel and his friends, they were amongst that group. The second time was in, I believe, 597 BC, so about like 8 years later, and that was whenever he laid siege to the city, and then he took more people captive, right? This one right here is the third time that Nebuchadnezzar's like laying waste to the city, and this is gonna be the final one, right? So he lays siege. I think it's like 588, 587 BC, somewhere in there, and 586 BC.
This isn't just like your normal long siege and like capture. He lays waste to
Yeah, like he is going to. By the end of this chapter, it's going to be demolished, right? The temple will be destroyed, the walls will be destroyed, the people will be taken out, and there's basically going to be very few people left in the land, right? So this is genuinely terrible moment, right? And so it happens in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month. If you remember, that actually helps you see the chronology there. In the former times, we talked about how he wasn't actually king yet, right? So he was still a prince at the time, but now he's the king, right? And he's about 10 years into his reign. He comes with his military force. They lay siege to Jerusalem. They camp against it. They build a siege wall around it. The idea is that they're not going to be leaving anytime soon. The city came under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. Nick, you already mentioned this, but Zedekiah, what was the deal there?
So, the first king who Nebuchadnezzar laid siege under was the nephew of Zedekiah, and his name was Jehoiakim, and he didn't want to serve the Babylonians, so he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, which brought about the first initial siege. And Zedekiah apparently didn't learn that lesson, and he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar as well during his reign, and so siege.
Yeah. So if you remember, Jehoiakim, that's the one we talked about last week. His other name was Jeconiah, and that's the one we spent a little bit of time talking about some weird prophecies going on with him. When you go look at Jeremiah, Jeremiah gives this prophecy saying there will never be a seed from Jeconiah who sits on the throne again. And that's a weird passage, specifically because Jeconiah is like the heir of David. And then the question is like, well, wait a second. I thought God said that there would always be a son of David sitting on the throne. And then you realize, oh, well, technically, Jesus, like through Joseph, like Joseph was not his literal father. And so technically it's like both are true, right? He is the adopted son of Joseph, and therefore he's the heir of David, but he is not a literal seed of Jeconiah. But there's also other ways to work around that too, but that was kind of interesting. But yeah, so Nebuchadnezzar kicked Jeconiah out. He put Zedekiah in his place. Zedekiah has been there for 11 years. But it tells us, we read this at the end of chapter 24, it says, then the king of Babylon made his uncle Mattaniah king in his place and changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. For through the anger of Yahweh this came about in Jerusalem and Judah until he cast them out of his presence, and Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. Right? And one thing that we had seen at the beginning of chapter 24 is that at this point, rebellion is not a good idea. Right? Because ultimately, while the Babylonians are bad guys, they're bad guys sent by God. And so, as we're going to see when we go through Jeremiah, at this point, the prophets are actually telling them to just submit. Right? There's no escaping the judgment. They just have to accept it and trust God to provide for them in the midst of it. And so, him rebelling against Babylon, ironically, is also him rebelling against God. Which seems weird, because he's rebelling against the pagan nation. But him rebelling against the pagan nation is rebelling against the God who sent that pagan nation, which just kind of highlights the weird, complex theology going on here. But now God's going to make him deal with the punishment for that. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so strong in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Whoa, hold up, there's a famine now? What's going on there?
That's just a typical byproduct of the way that war was conducted at the time. So whenever a siege would fall onto a city, the first thing that would get, like, the whole idea behind a siege is that no food can get into the city from, like, the surrounding farmlands because there's an entire army surrounding the city. So yeah. So my point is that whenever it says famine there, it's not talking about famine how we typically think of the term. We usually think of a famine as in, like, it wasn't raining and, there's like dry ground.
The reason there's a famine is because there's literally an army surrounding the city, keeping there from being any food. And this
starvation.
What's that?
The starvation.
Yeah, the starvation. And this is where you get to stuff like prophesied in Deuteronomy, where it says that if the people do not obey Torah and they sin against God, He will send Gentile armies to surround them, and it'll get so bad that literally people, like mothers, will be eating their own children. And that's stuff that happened at this time, which is genuinely horrific to even fathom. But that's what happened, right? So there was the famine was so strong in the city, there was no food for the people of the land. Then the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate between the two walls beside the king's garden, though the Chaldeans were all around the city. And they went by the way of the Arabah. Alright, so what happens there?
So the Babylonians breach Jerusalem, but sometime during the night, all the soldiers of the Judean army are able to escape through one of the gates, despite the fact that the entire Babylonian army is surrounding Jerusalem.
Yeah, but what's the issue there?
They're still surrounded.
Yes, but also, who are the ones who are fleeing?
All
The soldiers.
Yeah, what's the soldiers, what is their job?
To protect the people.
To protect the people, right? Like that's quite literally their job by definition. Yet they're the ones fleeing. Not a great moment for the Jewish army, I'd say.
And I guess it's implied in the next verse, but I'm assuming it's the king, like surrounded by his like entourage that's fleeing.
Pretty much. It's like
yes,
They go straight to pursuing the king, so I'm
Yeah.
assuming that when it says that, it's referring to the king fleeing, surrounded by.
So basically, all the leaders are fleeing. So it's like the reverse of like going down with the ship. And it's like, like the king's like, bye, and he just like
He's taking the first robot out.
Yeah, which is pretty messed up. One thing I want to highlight here, and this the commentary that I usually read is way over there, and I don't feel like getting up and grabbing it. But one thing I want to highlight is that the word for garden does not show up very often in Scripture, right? The Hebrew word is just dan, and it just means a garden or enclosure or something like that. Anybody have an idea of where the first time the word garden shows up in Scripture is? Genesis, right? Yeah, Genesis chapters 2 and 3. In Genesis 2 and 3, it shows up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 times in Genesis 2 and 3. Right? 12 times. The next time the word shows up, it is in Genesis 13, and it is comparing Sodom and Gomorrah to the Garden of Eden before it was destroyed by God. Right? So even the next time, referring back to the Garden of Eden. Right? The next time the word shows up is in Deuteronomy chapter 11, and that's just where Moses is giving commands about how to take care of the land. And then, the next time it shows up is in 1 Kings and 2 Kings. It only shows up once in 1 Kings, and it's specifically talking about, you remember the story at the end of 1 Kings? Whenever Ahab wants Naboth's vineyard?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's this moment where this corrupt king is taking for himself something he's not supposed to have, right? And then we go to 2 Kings, and it says that Ahaziah, the king of Judah, this is 2 Kings chapter 9, he saw what was going on whenever somebody was killed, and he fled by the way of the garden house. Do you remember what story was happening here? There was this one king from Israel who was going on a killing spree.
Oh, Jehu.
Jehu, right? Yeah. So Jehu we called him the northern Messiah, because he is the only king of the northern kingdom who was actually described as an anointed one of God, right? And he was basically sent by God as his hand of vengeance, right? And he goes and he chases down Ahaziah, and Ahaziah runs by the garden, right? And then after that, the next time we read about a garden is in 2 Kings 21, where we have Manasseh sleeping with his fathers and being buried in the garden of his own house, right? He was buried in the grave in the garden of Uzzah, right? And then the next time is right here. Main reason I want to highlight that is because every single instance where a garden is being mentioned, it is being associated with somebody who is grasping onto something that is not theirs. And it all seems to call back to the Garden of Eden, right? To where it shows up a bunch in early Genesis, and then all of a sudden, it doesn't show up until 1 and 2 Kings, and you've got Ahaz who is wanting something that is not his, right? And it's a garden, right? And that's kind of like Eve grabbing the fruit. And then you've got Ahaziah running by the garden as he's trying to escape the punishment of God. And then you've got Manasseh, who is literally the king who sealed God's judgment, and he's being buried by a garden. And then you have this right here. The main reason I highlight that is just to notice that theme, is that it seems like all of this is supposed to be calling back to the Garden of Eden, because how did the Garden of Eden story end?
Exile.
Exile, right? They were sent out of the garden, right? So Ahaziah, he dies running past the garden. Right here, then the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate between the two walls beside the king's garden, right? They are exiling themselves, right? And so like there's just like this recurring motive of or motif of gardens being associated with human sin, right? It's like God had given them something beautiful, but because of sin they squandered it, and they're leaving, and they're facing judgment from God. Like, so there's like just like it's just kind of interesting. And then whenever you compare that to the very end of like Revelation, where like Eden is restored and there's no more rebellion, it's like you finally get a garden that isn't being associated with sin. Kind of cool. Anyways, back to this. They go between the two walls beside the king's garden, though the Chaldeans were all around the city. Remind me who the Chaldeans are. Babylonians, yeah, just another term for them. And they went by the way of the Arabah. But the military force of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his military force was scattered from him. Okay, so they chased them down, and where did they catch them at? Jericho. Why is that significant?
Because it's the first place the Israelites who were entering the Promised Land came.
Yes, so the Israelites came into the Promised Land. The first place they conquer is Jericho, right? And then eventually, I mean, you could kind of say that the conquest is ultimately finished whenever David conquers Jerusalem and makes that the place where God's name dwells. Mm-hmm. And so now you have a son of David, or a descendant of David, who is fleeing from Jerusalem to Jericho. So what does that sound like? It's a reversal of the conquest, right? So this is like foreshadowing the exile. And again, this is why I just like to highlight that the geography of the land is really important. For us, it's like, sometimes it's hard to keep track of all this stuff because we're not from Israel and stuff like that, but if you just pay attention to the locations, there's a message to this, right? Ironically, the king himself is sending himself into exile, right? He is literally reversing the trajectory. God gave him the land, starting with Jericho, all the way to Jerusalem. The king is running away from God's judgment by putting himself into exile. Were you going to say something?
No, he is going east of Eden, basically.
He is.
He's
Going
east, right?
He's literally heading east. Yeah, he's going from Jerusalem. There you go. Boom. And he goes by the garden. Huh. That's interesting. Yeah. He is quite. I mean, if Jerusalem is like the new temple, right? Mm. And he is literally going out of the garden. He's literally going east of Eden. That's a reference to Genesis chapter 3. Whenever it says they left the garden, they went east of Eden, and so yeah, that's kind of interesting. Cool. Don't know what else to do with that, but yeah. So the military force of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his military force was scattered from him. So even when he's trying to save himself by exiling himself, he cannot escape, right? So even though he's trying to save himself, he will have to answer for his sin. Then they seized the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they spoke their judgment on him. All right. So what did they do?
They capture him, and then they basically put him on trial.
Yeah.
Which, it's not really a fair trial, because everyone's conducting it and they're conquering. So,
yeah.
We find you guilty of,
Well, to be fair, they probably don't have to do anything unfair, because what did he do?
He rebelled against them.
He rebelled, so, like, that's treason. So, I mean, even if it was a fair trial, like, he's guilty, right? They were a vassal state, they rebelled against their leaders, and therefore he is guilty. And not only that, but he tried to escape and run away from the law. He basically got into the ancient equivalent of a police chase, and he lost. Which is it's so much more pathetic when you realize that he's like the leader, right? Like that's really bad. Like imagine nowadays if like the president got into a police chase. Like that's really embarrassing for the nation, right? Like that's really bad. Like you know that your nation is crumbling whenever like you turn on the news and the president is like speeding down the highway running away from you. It's like, oh well. Yeah, we're kind of screwed as a nation at that point. And that's what the king's doing, right? He's letting his people suffer back in Jerusalem while he escapes to freedom only to be captured. It's like, okay. So, verse 7, and they slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. Then he blinded the eyes of Zedekiah and bound him with bronze fetters and brought him to Babylon. What happens there?
It's like back into slavery.
Yeah, it's a bit worse than that because his entire dynasty gets killed before him, and then it's only then that he gets blinded.
Yeah, so what's the significance of that? Why do they do it in that order? Why do they murder his family and then blind his eyes?
Punishment?
So it's the
It's
last
punishment.
thing he
This
sees.
is the last thing he sees, right?
Mm.
Like that's it's pretty messed up. But that's how they were doing it. It's like, yeah, they want the last thing that this king sees to be them murdering his children. Which communicates a clear message. It's like, yeah, like they're not even giving him the luxury of death. Instead, they're like, no, we're going to make you live constantly remembering what you've done, right? Because of your actions, your children are murdered, and that's the last sight that you ever have remembrance of. Now, and keep in mind, the kids are probably pretty young, right? This guy became king when he was 21. He's 32 years old now. His kids are probably young.
Teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's just the last thing he sees, and then they bind him in bronze, bring him to Babylon, so they can parade him around as like a trophy of war. Right? This is what happens whenever people like kings oppose Babylon. They become blind slaves. It kind of reminds you of Samson a little bit.
That's true.
One thing I wanted to highlight real quick, just because it's relevant, is there is a supposed contradiction that people highlight here, and I thought it was just worth exploring real quick. I was trying to find exactly what the verses were. All right. Jeremiah 34:3 is the first one. So, like I said, we're going to be going through Jeremiah soon, so we'll be going through these verses. And then, after we go through Daniel, we're going to go through Ezekiel, but that's both of what we're looking at real quick. So, Jeremiah 34, it's verse 3. I'll read a few verses before that. This is Jeremiah prophesying against Zedekiah. It says, the word which came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, when Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon and all his military force with all the kingdoms of the earth that were under his dominion and all the peoples were fighting against Jerusalem and against all its cities, saying, right, so this is this is basically at the same moment, right? Nebuchadnezzar is waging war on the city. Jeremiah says this, thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, go and speak to Zedekiah king of Judah and say to him, thus says Yahweh, behold, I am giving this city into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he will burn it with fire. And you will not escape from his hand, for you will surely be seized and given into his hand. And you will see the king of Babylon eye to eye, and he will speak with you face to face, and you will go to Babylon. Right, so the main thing to emphasize there is it says, you will see him, right, and you'll go to Babylon. But then you go to Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 12. Oh, I went too far. Hold on. Ezekiel chapter 12, verse 13. I always like to highlight these things because they're kind of fun. Ezekiel 12:13. I'll start a little bit before this. Say to them, thus says Lord Yahweh, this oracle concerns the prince in Jerusalem, as well as all the house of Israel who are in it. Say, I am a wondrous sign to you. As I have done, so it will be done to them. They will go into exile, into captivity. The prince who is among them will carry his baggage on his shoulder in the dark and go out. They will dig a hole through the wall to bring it out. He will cover his face so that he cannot see the land with his eyes. I will also spread my net over him, and he will be caught in my snare, and I will bring him to Babylon in the land of Chaldeans, yet he will not see it, though he will die there. Right? So, in Jeremiah it says, you will see the king of Babylon, and you will go off to Babylon. And then Ezekiel says, you will not see the Babylon, but you will go to Babylon. So, people will be like, oh, look, it's a contradiction. One says you will see it, one says you won't. But I think there's a pretty clear answer to this.
I'm confused how it's a contradiction.
It's because people like to be skeptical, and they like to make contradictions where they're not. But could somebody just give me the very, what I would say is straightforward explanation there? How do you explain it?
He's blinded when he goes, so he can't physically see it.
Yeah, so he can't see it when he gets there, but it says you will see that. So he saw part of it, but then he's blinded, and he doesn't see it, right? So basically the people who are reading Jeremiah, what they try to like, they always try to make this text say what it's not saying, right? That's just something I try to highlight. Whenever people say there's a contradiction in the Bible, that's usually where it comes from. They take the text further than it was ever meant to go, right? So they go to Jeremiah and they're saying, well, Jeremiah says that he's going to see Babylonian captivity and he's going to see Babylon. No, it doesn't. It says you'll see the king of Babylon and you will go to Babylonian captivity, right? And even then, like, you could even argue that he's not even talking literally about physically seeing. He could just be talking about the fact that you'll experience it, right? Like, you could argue that.
Well, yeah, that, like, when you go to, like, see the president or see the king, it's like having an audience with.
Yes.
Being brought
like,
before.
So you could argue that, but even if you're going to make it literal, right? There's still not a contradiction because he saw King Babylon, and then he blinded him, and therefore he didn't see the captivity, right? So, like, I just want to highlight that because, I don't know, people get kind of silly and they try to say there's contradictions, but usually if you just read the text, like if you go read a Bart Ehrman book, it's always like that. Like, he'll be like, oh man, like if you read the Gospel of Mark, it suggests that Jesus had 2 donkeys when he entered Jerusalem, and he was straddling both of them and just standing on top of them as he rode into the city. And that is not what Mark says at all. Like, it's just like, if you read the text, it's like, that's not what it says. But like, they try to make the Bible say something it's not. And so just be aware of that. People who try to argue that stuff, they're just being goofballs, and they're honestly not worth listening to. But as Christians, it's our job to listen to them so that we can defend the faith. But just worth looking at. Okay, anyways. They seized the king, brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah. They spoke their judgment on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. Then he blinded the eyes of Zedekiah, bound him with bronze fetters, brought him to Babylon. And this guy had to live the rest of his life with the final memory of watching his kids die. Which is not something I would wish on anybody. But from the perspective of the author of Kings, this is judgment, right? Like, the author isn't saying that this was a good judgment or bad judgment. It's just judgment, right? God sent the Babylonians, and sure, I guess you could argue that the Babylonians probably did more like vicious things that like God doesn't approve of everything they do, but all of these things are nevertheless judgments sent from God, right? That's just something to be aware of.
This might be a stretch, but it's not that important. But the last part, the last part is, it also does kind of look like a reverse Exodus again, because like with Exodus, they were in slavery, and then the Egyptians were like, they experienced plagues, and then there was like the death of the like firstborn children, and then they like the Israelites fled Egypt and were pursued. Now it's like the king is fled, king flees and is pursued, and then the children are like the firstborn are killed, and then the plague, being blinded, and then back into slavery, like bronze fetters.
I can even see that, yeah, because when you go to Exodus, the plague before the firstborn is darkness. So like it could literally.
I couldn't remember if there was like a plague tied to blindness per se, but I was thinking maybe there was like a darkness.
Yeah, so there's darkness, and then you have the death of the firstborn, the death of the children is the catalyst for freedom, whereas this, you've got the death of the firstborn preceding darkness, which then precedes slavery. So yeah, it's quite literally a reversal of that too. Which again, stuff like that is worth highlighting, because like we say it's a stretch, but I only think that we view it as a stretch because we are Christians who mainly focus on the New Testament. I think if you're a Jewish person reading this, who is familiar with the Old Testament scriptures, you would just pick up on that stuff. Like there's reasons why the author highlights the details he does, right? And that's true in any history textbook, right? Like whenever you read a history book, you're not being exhaustive with it, right? Like you're not going to detail, oh yeah, there was a hummingbird flying in the backyard. It's like, you don't care about that, right? That's not relevant to the story, right? So whenever a historian writes a book, they're being selective with their details only to highlight the relevant stuff. And so all those details, like to a Jewish person, it does add these extra layers of meaning, right? To where, for us, we're like, oh wow, that's horrific. That like this person, the last thing they see is the death of their children. Like emotionally, that's already bad enough. But if you're a Jewish person who every single day of your life, you have been taught to look back at the Exodus as like the crowning moment of your history, like the Exodus is the moment whenever Israel truly became a nation, right? And that was the moment whenever they first came to realize that God, Yahweh was their God. And now you read it that way, and this is a reversal of that. It's like, oh, like this is the worst moment of our nation. And it's because we've forgotten that Yahweh is our God, right? So like, it does add that extra layer of depth that I think sometimes we just miss because we're American Christians who don't like reading our Old Testaments. But yeah, so that's what happened. Okay, cool. Moving on, verses 8 through 12. Let's see what happens next.
Now on the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. And he burned the house of Yahweh, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Even every great house he burned with fire. So all the military force of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard tore down the walls around Jerusalem. Then the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the defectors who had defected to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the multitude, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took away into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen.
All right. Well, things don't get better. Yeah, I hate to break it to y'all. This is just going to be a really negative chapter today. It's just going to be one, like, it's going to just get worse and worse and worse. I mean, honestly, we're going to be in a pretty negative portion of Israel's history for a while because, like, really, the back half of the Old Testament, honestly, most of the Old Testament is kind of a bummer just because the people, like, God's people are so rebellious. The reason the New Testament is such a happier book is just because it only covers like 50 years, like we were talking earlier. Like if you just kept going deeper into church history, it would also get sad.
That's true.
So what happens in these verses?
Basically detailing the third exile.
Yeah, the third and final exile.
Cities torn down and more people are taken away.
Yeah.
All that's left is the peasants.
Dang peasants. Yeah, and we'll talk about why again. We talked about that a little bit last week, but we'll reinforce it. So on the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard. I'm pretty sure Nebuzaradan literally just means the captain of the guard. Like I'm almost confident. Like, which is just that's funny to me. Yeah.
Like Nebuchadnezzar is probably not his name. It's probably just
Nick and I were talking about this earlier. I wonder if like sometimes we forget, like this is a total tangent, it's not really relevant at all. We kind of forget that like these people have like actual lives. Like we only read about certain moments. Like Nebuchadnezzar growing up, he like had a best friend and stuff. Like
yeah.
I wonder what his like nickname was, you know? Like, because I know for a fact people did not just like be like, hey Nebuchadnezzar, how was your day? Nebuchadnezzar, you acted up like, you know, like he had to have a nickname. Like, like it was probably just Chad. But I don't know.
Sure.
Like that's just silly to me, but I like to ponder things like that. Like Moses had a best friend. Was Joshua his best friend? I don't know. Like Joshua was his successor, but like I don't know. Moses probably had like a buddy that just like wasn't mentioned in the Bible. That's just interesting to me. It's like I said, not relevant at all. Just it piques my curiosity.
Yeah.
Sorry, just even still on that. Really, the only friendship we hear about in the Bible is David and Jonathan. Like, and other than I guess Jesus and the apostles, but like that's just interesting. Because like friendship is a very relevant thing, but like we just don't hear about it much.
I guess that is true.
Yeah, it's just strange. Anyways, now on the 7th day of the 5th month, which was in the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He's not coming for good news. He's coming to destroy things. And he burned the house of Yahweh. The king's house and all the house of Jerusalem, even every great house he burned with fire. Alright. So let's talk about what happens in that verse in general, but then let's focus on the thing that's probably really significant there. What happens in general here?
Arson.
Arson, yes. But specifically, what is he targeting?
Their culture.
Their culture, but
He's
even more than that.
targeting the like nobles and aristocracy.
Yeah, like the people in power, right?
People of status, the ones who have realistically already been taken away, so their houses have kind of just been left empty, unless the people who were, suffering at the time took up refuge in their houses.
Well, so most likely what I imagine happened is that whenever they displaced the original people, other people stepped into their place. But now he's making it to where you just can't rebuild, right? Like it's like he's destroying all the governmental buildings. He's destroying all the significant places to where like these are the final moments of the kingdom of Judah, right? Like it's just like he's just destroying every single thing that makes them their culture, like you said. But what's the most significant thing that he destroys here?
The temple.
The temple, right? This is like, this is bad. Like to me, this brings to mind way back in 1 Samuel, right? The very beginning of 1 Samuel. Do you remember whenever the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant? Mm-hmm. Right? Do you remember how the high priest Eli responded to that?
like to the news.
Yeah.
Like how he fell over and died.
Yeah. Well, it's like because basically, do you remember the person came back and reported the news?
Oh yeah.
Right. And they were like, "We lost the battle. Moreover, your sons are dead. Moreover, the ark has been captured." And it says whenever he learned that the ark had been captured, he fell back and he landed on his head because he was a fat man and his neck broke and he died. And like it was the news of the ark being taken that killed him, right? Like it was like that was like it wasn't even the news of his children's death. It was the ark being taken because the ark. I mean, that's where God's presence dwells, right? Like if the ark is gone, God's abandoned us, right? Like that's what it feels like. But the ark isn't mentioned. We talked about this last week. The Ark of the Covenant is never mentioned again in the Old Testament after it is placed in the temple back at the beginning of 1 Kings.
Technically, yeah, it is actually mentioned in Jeremiah, which is kind of random.
How is it mentioned in Jeremiah?
It's in Jeremiah 3. It just says, "No longer will they say the Ark of the Covenant."
Oh, it's like
yeah,
okay.
It's kind of random, but.
Well, is that like when it's also saying like no longer will they say the temple? Like, does it list out a bunch of different things?
I don't think so,
Oh,
actually.
okay.
I have to go back and look at it, but yeah. I mean, even then, it's not really like talking about anything physical.
Yeah. So the last time we physically see the ark
Yes.
in the Old Testament is whenever it's being placed into the temple at the coronation under Solomon. Back in first, like this is like 200 years or 400 years earlier, right? 931-ish. Well, a little bit after that. And so we don't know what happened to the Ark of the Covenant, but that's because really the Ark of the Covenant wasn't as important anymore. God didn't need like what was important is that God dwelt in the temple. This was His house, and they destroyed it. Right? And so this moment right here really communicates the fact like, oh, okay, like there's no coming back from this, right? Like this is the place where God made His name to dwell, and it's now going up in smoke. And you can tell, like again, this moment right here is something that's commemorated even to this day, and this is why a few hundred years later, whenever the second temple is destroyed, the Jewish people are going to have a backup plan. Right? There's a reason why Judaism still exists to this day, even though there hasn't been a temple for 2,000 years. And that's because, as a result of this destruction, the Jewish people realized, oh, we need to have a backup plan to preserve our culture when we don't have a temple. And so, after the exile and stuff like that, whenever they come back, you see like the rise of like, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and stuff like that by the time you get to the Gospels. Well, the Pharisees, their whole thing was, we're going to emphasize the Torah, and we're going to emphasize living righteously before God, so that in the event that like the temple is destroyed again, like the Jewish people can still remain unified. And so, sure enough, after the temple is destroyed, all the other sects of Judaism they're gone. Right? The Sadducees, they were the priests. You don't need priests without a temple. Right? The Essenes, they were monks, and they got destroyed in the battles under the Romans. And then the Zealots, well, they're the ones who kicked off the battle, and they got killed too. Right? The Pharisees were the only ones who survived, and they eventually reformed Judaism into modern rabbinic Judaism, which exists to this day. Right? And so that's how, if you look at modern Jewish teachings, they're all centralized around how to be Jewish without a temple. And that kind of dates back to this, where they're like, okay, well, apparently, whenever God judges us, He is not beyond allowing the temple to be destroyed. And so they needed something to maintain that unity. So, burn the house of Yahweh, the king's house. I don't know. I wish that there was something we could do to emphasize how heartbreaking burning the house of Yahweh is, right? Like, that's even more heartbreaking than, like, a church being burned down, right? I mean, ironically, our church, it was, it did go up in flames, 20 years ago or something like that? And we still talk about that in our church, right? But it's not the same, right? For us, I don't even know what kicked off the fire, but, it burned down. It was not an act of judgment, and also, this was not the place where God's name came to dwell, right? But this place is different, right? This is the place where for hundreds of years, God dwelt there, and Him dwelling there was a sign of His, commitment to dwelling with man again, right? It's central to the story of Scripture, right? Ever since the Garden of Eden, man had been exiled from God. Through Israel, He came to dwell with them again. He lived with them in a tabernacle for a little bit, then finally, He lived in a fixed place in Jerusalem. And for hundreds of years, He lived there. Really significant. And then now it's being burned. And it's not being burned by accident, right? It's not like, oh no, them sneaky Babylonians came in and destroyed the temple. No, God allowed it to happen. And when we get to Ezekiel, we're going to see Ezekiel having a vision where God leaves it first. It's like basically God moves out. He says, you know what, these people are so sinful, I'm leaving. And then He allows the vacant temple to be destroyed. And like that's how heartbreaking this is. And so again, if you're reading this from the perspective of the original audience, all of this is happening because of how sinful they are. And it communicates God does not take sin lightly. Right? You can't just like live in sin and think, oh yes, it's all right. I'm a chosen person of God, right? It's all right. I'm the seed of Abraham, therefore I'm fine. It's all right. I prayed a prayer when I was little. I'm fine. No, like God cares about how you live, and if you keep walking this way, there will be discipline, right? If you're a parent and your child is being endlessly rebellious, you're gonna be gracious with them for a bit, but eventually you're gonna have to show them tough love because you realize that's the only way to move forward, right? And if they choose to rebel and leave, okay, hopefully not. Hopefully they will repent and turn back to you, and you'll all be restored. But that's how God is functioning here, right? He's functioning like a good parent, right? And he's disciplining his people. So all the military force of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard tore down the walls around Jerusalem. Keep in mind that all of this is also laying the framework for what's going to happen when they return from exile, right? So whenever we get to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, they're going to come back, and their first orders of business are rebuild the temple, rebuild the walls. Why is it significant to have walls around a city?
To protect from outside forces.
Yeah, to protect from outside forces. And them tearing down the walls is just further reinforcing the fact they will not be able to rebuild. Right? If you do not have walls, you can't defend yourself. And whenever we read Nehemiah, it's actually a pretty cool story. People are actively trying to stop them from rebuilding. And so Nehemiah, like literally, there's going to be like people who are rebuilding the walls, and they like have like their hammers in one hand, and they've got swords in the other. To where it's like they're rebuilding, but they're prepared to fight at any moment. It's kind of like a sick imagery. But were you gonna say something?
I was gonna say I don't know if another like thing where it might be a stretch, but just because I don't know of any other story in the Bible where there's like walls being torn down, but is this also possibly a callback to Jericho? Like in the sense that like they would be like they'd be the conquered ones, like.
Yeah, I don't know if that would be a clear allusion to it here, but at the very same, like it communicates the same message, right? Because at least in Jericho, you have God supernaturally bringing the walls down on judgment of Jericho to provide for Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And then here you've got God allowing, like, it is reversal in the sense of, in Jericho, you've got the Israelites coming in and conquering a pagan nation, right? Now you've got a pagan nation coming in and conquering Israel. So it is at the very least a reversal.
But it may not be like an actual allusion to it.
Yeah, I don't know if it'd be an illusion just because at that time period, tearing down walls would have been like a commonplace way of destroying a city.
Yeah.
But to be fair, we don't read about it very often.
Yeah, it's not mentioned really elsewhere, but the nature of it is really complicated.
Yeah. So then the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the defectors who had defected to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the multitude, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took away into exile. That's interesting. So there's 3 different categories of people there, right? What's the first category?
The rest of the people who were left.
Yeah, so the people who were left in the city, these are the ones who were still trying to hold strong and persevere to the end. They're taken into captivity. Who's the second group of people? What's that?
Deserters.
Deserters, right? The ones who had defected. They said, you know what? Forget y'all. We're going to Babylon's side. Did things work out for them? Nope. They received the same fate. And then the rest of the multitude. I'm assuming that this is probably referring to people who are outside the city, just other inhabitants of Judah. At this time period, there probably weren't many. The kingdom had basically been reduced to, it seems like, just the city. But I'm sure there were others around, and so all of them were taken away. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. Why would he do this?
To keep the land usable. He didn't want the land to die out, basically.
Why?
Because
Live in the desert.
Well, yeah, because it's still very valuable real estate, right? I mean, now it is a vassal state of the Babylonian Empire. And if you think about it, there's a reason why people have wanted the land of Israel historically for so long, and it's not just for religious reasons. If you look at a map, Israel is this one fertile area with a huge body of water to the left and a huge desert to the right. And you've got this nice little fertile area that connects 3 different continents, right? Europe, Asia, and Africa, all connected on this tiny little piece of real estate. And so if you just let this place go untended to, and it turns into this arid desert wilderness, then all of a sudden you have crippled your empire. Like you've crippled the potential for your empire, right? And so there's a reason why so many different people have fought over Israel, and it's not just religious. It's like, very practically speaking, very important land, right? And that actually reinforces why it's so cool that God chose that land, because it's like, when you fast forward a few hundred years to the Roman Empire, that land is the perfect place for the gospel to be birthed from, right? Because like there's literally Roman highways going through the land, and like so like whenever the gospel is sent to the nations, it's like it's the perfect place to go north, south, east, and west, and that's really neat. But yeah, so he leaves people behind to tend to the land so that it doesn't just turn into nothing. But he leaves the poor people, right? The people who they're uneducated, they would not be able to just kick off like it sounds pretty messed up, but they're not the ones who are educated enough to know how to, kick off a huge insurrectionist movement and reestablish a government. They're just simple people, right? They know how to plow fields. They know how to take care of stuff. And again, this is also judgment from God, because the people had not. We're going to talk about this in Jeremiah, but because the people had not been honoring the Sabbath day, God says, "I'm going to give the land Sabbath rest for 70 years." Right? Basically, the 70 years are punishment for all the Sabbaths the people did not like during their several hundred years living in the land. They neglected the Sabbath. God says, "Okay, well, I'm going to give it Sabbath rest for you." And so the land is going to be tended to, but God's going to be the one who really takes care of it during the time. All right, we move on. Verses 13 through 17. Sean, could you read through that and then also just get people talking, because I've really got to use the restrooms.
Okay.
I'll be back.
Now the bronze pillars which were in the house of Yahweh, and the stands in bronze sea which were in the house of Yahweh, the Chaldeans shattered and carried the bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the spoons, and all the bronze vessels which were used to minister. The captain of the guard also took away the fire pans and the bowls, which was what was fine gold and what was fine silver. The two pillars, the one sea, and the stands which Solomon had made for the house of Yahweh, the bronze of all these vessels was beyond weights. The height of the one pillar was 18 cubits, and the bronze capital was on it. The height of the capital was 3 cubits, with a network and pomegranates on the capital all around, all of bronze. And the second pillar was like these, with network. So, what do we read about here?
The Babylonian army is basically just taking away all the valuables that were in the temple and either destroying them or carrying them off to Babylon as treasures.
Repurpose them.
Yeah. Yes.
Hey, these are ours now.
It's like
You
calling.
don't need them. You're not living here anymore.
Yeah, and it's like calling back specifically to like all the stuff we talked about in First Kings, like all the different parts of the.
It also shows
temple.
just like how, how well this stuff had to have been crafted and kept for it to still hold the kind of value that the Babylonians would. Because if it was just like a bunch of random useless junk, I'm sure they would have destroyed it all. But they carried a bunch of it back with them without destroying it because it was still well kept. It's still,
Well, I guess technically they did kind of like refurbish a lot of the
Yeah.
fix a lot of stuff up right before this.
Yeah, that's true. With Josiah.
Mm.
I don't know. It's just really interesting, the detail that the author of Kings goes into on how well the pillars and how carefully crafted everything was.
Yeah, well, it's like it's so specific that it makes you think back to First Kings when Solomon, the instructions for building the temple and what they did, and then it makes you sad because you realize they're not building, they're deconstructing it. Yeah.
Y'all just talking about why it goes into so much detail.
Part of it, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is to emphasize the heartbreak of it, to where it's I think you might have been talking about this. This is the first time we even read about the exact dimensions of the pillars, because I don't in verse 17. I don't think it gives us that details back in those details back in First Kings.
Oh,
it tells us there were pillars, but it doesn't tell us how big they were. Whereas it's almost again, read this from the perspective of the original audience. It's almost like the author is highlighting It's almost like as the temple is being destroyed, he's reminding the audience of how beautiful it actually was. He's like, guys, I know that you thought, like, whenever I was describing its beauty at the time of Solomon, I know you were picturing one thing, but I want you to even heighten that. He's like, the pillars, right? Like, these things were huge. They were 18 cubits tall. Like, that's 27 feet. That's huge. And like, I don't know, like, I feel like that's probably what it's trying to go for. Like, it's just like, to emphasize the heartbreak of it.
Yeah.
It's like he's going into more detail, be like, they took this, and this, and this. Like, it's like reinforcing, like, oh, you didn't realize all the stuff was in there, but it was. That's actually why I was grabbing the handy commentary thing, because I feel like he said something about that. What's that?
I said in the first part it says they shattered the pillars.
Shattered the pillars. Where was it? Nebuchadnezzar completes the removal of the glories of Solomon from the land. He begins with the gold of the temple, and later comes to remove all the bronze. So the gold was removed back in chapter 24. The narrator gives particular attention to the destruction of the monumental pillars, ironically providing the dimensions of the pillars as they are being disassembled and cut into pieces. Long before, back in 1 Kings 14, Pharaoh Shishak had invaded Jerusalem and removed the gold but left the bronze, but at least Rehoboam's kingdom could boast of bronze. No more. Not only has the golden age deteriorated into the bronze, but even the bronze age is at an end. Parallel to the removal of the temple vessels is the removal of the people. Initially, Nebuchadnezzar removes the skilled inhabitants of Jerusalem, the gold of the nation, leaving the poorest. Ultimately, he's going to remove the poor as well. And so, yeah.
It's true. Also, like the totality of, Jerusalem's destruction and exile.
Yeah. Yeah, God left nothing.
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar left nothing, which is also God leaving nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So far, God has always left something there, right? Like, it's always like, they've always been brought to the brink of destruction, but God saved them. But this time, there's none of that. And again, it's heartbreaking because, to me, it feels like David after his sin with Bathsheba, where after his sin, David cries out to God, and he's praying, he's like, God, please, just like spare my child. And then after the child dies, David gets up and worships God. Right? And people respond, they're like, David, that doesn't make sense. You were like weeping before the child died, but like, now the child's dead and you get up and worship? And David basically says, God made his decision, now I have to make mine. Right? Like, the idea is that while there was hope for deliverance, I wept and I mourned and I was in a state of repentance. But now that God has made his judgment clear, all I can do is move forward and worship. And I feel like that's kind of the message being conveyed here. Up until the moment that the temple falls, there's always hope that maybe God will relent. But at this point, there's no more hope. And so if you're the Jewish audience reading this, you have a choice to make. Are you going to keep moping around and weeping like David, like people thought David should do? Or, from Babylon, are you going to get up, anoint yourself, and worship God? Does that make sense? Like, it's like, okay, like, they might, like, Josiah did his best to, like, leave them with a good legacy and restore things, but it's like, no, you're going to be destroyed. Like, God made his decision. Now it's up to you, O people of Judah, to repent and turn back to God. And that's going to be the message that Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel and them all share. Have y'all walked through any of the verses individually yet?
Right.
Okay. I think we can go through these ones pretty quickly because it's just a list of stuff.
Yeah.
So the bronze pillars which were in the house of Yahweh, and the stands, and the bronze seat which were in the house of Yahweh, the Chaldeans shattered and carried the bronze to Babylon. So again, the emphasis is on bronze, bronze, bronze. The gold was already taken, now the bronze is being taken. And again, these are all vessels of worship. And they're going to come back into play, back in Daniel. We read the passage last time. But eventually this is going to be the downfall of the Babylonians. Because they're going to be having a feast, and they're going to be like, hey, let's bring out those things that we plundered from the house of Yahweh. And they're going to bring them all out, and they're going to be drinking from them and stuff like that. And then a hand's going to show up and start writing on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And they're going to be like, we don't understand what this means. And Daniel's going to be like, oh, I understand what it means. It means you're screwed. And then the Babylonians are going to be killed that day, that evening. So that's a little spoiler alert for what we're going to go through in a few weeks. But
Fun fact, yeah.
fun fact. They also took away the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, I like that word. The spoons and all the bronze vessels which were used to minister. If you're wondering how snuffers and spoons were used to minister to stuff, just go to a liturgical church. Like go to like a Lutheran or Catholic church and you'll see. The captain of the guard also took away the fire pans and the bowls, and what was fine gold and what was fine silver. So literally a reversal of Solomon's reign, because under Solomon it's like silver became so numerous that it was like the stones of the land. But now there's no gold, no silver, no bronze. They're not winning any Olympian medals, apparently. To me, this whole paragraph reads like one of those old like Billy Mays. Was it Billy Mays? Was that the?
But wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. Yeah, that's what it feels like. But wait, there's more. It's like we took this and this and this, and if you thought that was all, just wait. The two pillars, the one sea, and the stands which Solomon had made for the house of Yahweh. The bronze of all these vessels was beyond weight. So the things he's mentioning in verse 16 are the same things from verse 13, right? But he brings them up again. But what does he mention here? Like, what detail does he add?
Innumerable, quantity.
Yes. Now, were they literally beyond weight?
Probably not.
No. Like, if you got a scale nowadays, you could probably figure out how much it weighed. The point is that they were valuable and it was a lot, right? Like, comparable to like what people would normally steal at that time. They're like, no, they destroyed us. Like it's like they took everything. The height of one pillar was 18 cubits. Keep in mind, 18 cubits is roughly a foot and a half, right? So it's 18 inches. Usually, it's roughly your elbow to your fingertips.
It's 1 cubit.
What? That's 1 cubit.
18.
Sorry, 1 cubit is 18 inches. And so 18 cubits would be... It'd be 18 feet times 1.5, so that'd be what? That'd be 27 feet? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right? So 27 feet tall. And a bronze capital was on it. Right? So we're actually getting this description of this whole thing. It was apparently very ornate. The height of the capital was 3 cubits, so 4.5 feet. With a network and pomegranates on the capital all around, all of bronze. So you have the garden-like imagery. That's one thing that's constantly highlighted in the with the temple, is that it's a place with precious stones and precious metals and garden-like imagery of like fruit. Like so, basically, the column is designed to look like a tree. And if you think about it, there's 2 columns, right, at the center of the garden. Right, so it's two trees at the center of the garden, right? So you got the tree of knowledge, tree of good and evil, and that's how you enter into the presence of God. It's being destroyed, right? So once again, literally, they are being rejected from Eden again. But it's not even them being rejected from Eden; it's Eden itself being destroyed, right? Like it's being dismantled one piece by another, right? It's like that. That's even more heartbreaking. It's almost like if you went to Genesis 3 and you read about the exile from Eden, but instead of God simply kicking Adam and Eve out, it was as if like God showed up and he started like just like getting rid of all the different like precious metals, draining the rivers that flowed into the garden, burning down the trees. Well, like that's almost what it looks like. That'd be like a comparable, like what this imagery is supposed to compare. It's a worse exile. Were you saying something? Okay. The height of the capital was 3 cubits with a network of pomegranate, the capital all around, all of bronze, and the second pillar was like these with network. So basically these beautiful ornate things just being shattered and carried off into captivity just so they can boast about it. We move on, verses 18 to 21.
Then the captain of the guard took Sariah, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, with the 3 doorkeepers of the temple. And from the city they took 1 official who was overseer of the men of war, and 5 of the king's advisors who were found in the city, and the scribe of the commander of the army who mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the city. And Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them, and led them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. Then the king of Babylon struck them down, and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah went into exile from its land.
Yeah, so really of all of that, the main thing we can focus on is the final verse.
Yeah.
Just because a lot of those names are things that I think they might show up in Jeremiah, but we just don't know much about a lot of this stuff. So big story, what happens here?
The top priests and the kings top advisors are captured and brought to Nebuchadnezzar, and
Yep.
and that basically like finalizes the exile.
Yeah. So all the rulers that were remaining are now dead. Like they're not even just in exile; they're dead. So the captain of the guard took Sariah the chief priest and Zephaniah the second priest with the 3 doorkeepers of the temple. So these are all the leaders, not just political leaders, they're religious leaders, right? The chief priest, I'm assuming that would be the high priest at this time, and Zephaniah the second priest. So he's the vice high priest, I guess. With the 3 doorkeepers of the temple. You don't need doorkeepers whenever there are no doors anymore. But like the idea is these are the 5 people in charge of the temple who were left. Takes them from the city. He took 1 official who was overseer of the men of war, and 5 of the king's advisors who were found in the city. Even as it's describing it, you kind of get the impression that there weren't many left, right? Like it's like, oh, there's 1 official. Like it's like it doesn't even give us his name. It's like it's just I don't know. There was a guy left who was kind of overseeing the men of war, like the soldiers, and apparently he wasn't very good because the soldiers fled for their lives. And then 5 of the king's advisors, they were found in the city. The scribe, the commander of the army, like it's like very specific job. But the idea is like he's just taking what remnant is left. Any who mustered people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the city. And Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them and led them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. Where is Riblah? I'm looking that up real quick.
No idea. It's where
The king of Babylon is at.
it's where Zedekiah's sons were killed, and he was blinded.
It's a place on the eastern boundary of Israel.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I
I don't think he likes Riblah. Yuppie. Chill, dude. I don't think it is Joseph. I think he's just barking because he likes to think he's tough, but he's not. Alright. Yuppie. Alright. Then the king of Babylon, thank you for being so tough. I'm really proud of you. Alright. Then the king of Babylon struck them down and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. Can't really say much more about that. But then you get to the final verse right here. It's not the end of the chapter, but it's really the end of this portion of the story. So Judah went into exile from its land. Alright. If you are the original audience, what is the effect of these words on you?
It's like a gut punch.
Yeah, because where are they at right now?
They're still in exile.
Yeah. So it's like think about how like sometimes we read like Revelation. You know, whenever we read Revelation, we're like, oh, this is the part of the story that we belong to now. You know, it's like we finally caught up to the present. Or like honestly, after the Gospels, right? Basically, after the Gospels, what the Bible calls the end times has begun, right? And so again and again, whenever like you read throughout the different letters and stuff like that, it says in the end days things will be like this and this and this. Well, that's ever since Christ left, we're in the end times, right? That's like how the Bible categorizes it. And whenever you read that, you can't help but like there's like this ominous feeling of like, oh, this is our part of the story. And for us as Christians, I feel like it's probably a little bit more exciting because where we're at in the story, even though there's still heartbreak and we know that things are going to get really bad, there's still a certain level of triumph to it because of how the Gospels end, right? It's like the Gospels don't end with Jesus in the tomb. They end with him resurrecting, like having dominion over sin and death. Like death no longer has dominion over him. He's in charge. The kingdom is his, and he sends us out on a mission to go and like make him known, to prepare people for his return, right? Like that's really triumphant. And while we still live in a world filled with sin and death and decay and all that stuff, we're still like hopeful in the midst of that because we're like, hey, like we know how the story ends and it's really good. I don't feel like the original audience would have felt that way about this though, because you'll notice that there is no moment right here where there's like this final moment of triumph for Judah. It's like, no, like, if there was, it was under King Josiah a few chapters ago, but all Josiah proved to us is that the Torah and the temple were insufficient to save man. It's like, congratulations, you know these things that are like the focal point of your nation? They cannot save you, right? Even if you repent, even if you try to follow Torah, even if you try to save the temple, they cannot save you. And so even in spite of all that, they're destroyed, they go off into exile, and now for the people reading this, they're like, this is our story. They're living in Babylon, they receive this news, and it's like, it's just heartbreaking. You're like, oh, like, for all, basically, if you've read through Samuel and Kings, you've been reading your own people's history, and then finally it's caught up to you, and the place where it catches up to you is at like the darkest note. It's like, yeah, y'all once were an amazing kingdom, but under your parents, it was destroyed. And all the things that were once beautiful about the land are now gone because of the sin of your forefathers. And so if you're like the original audience, your message is like, oh, crud. We need to get right before God. It's like you recognize, oh, this is like literally, this is how bad it gets. We cannot allow this to continue in this way. And so I feel like it would be a very sobering thing. Whereas for us nowadays, I think as Christians, because we're in such a much more positive place, we're more tempted to like sit back and do nothing. Because we're like, Jesus paid it all. It's fine. We can just sit back and wait until the new kingdom arrives. Whereas I feel like if our part of the story was in such a negative place, we would realize, oh, that's not how we should respond. It's like, sin is a problem. So really when we read the death of Christ, we should realize, oh, we're the ones who put him there, right? And we cannot continue to live in such a way. Anyways, let's move on to the next part and see how this story is ultimately going to conclude. There's only 30 verses in the chapter, so we're almost skipping there.
Now, as for the people who were left in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon had left, he appointed Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, over them. Then all the commanders of the military forces, they and their men, heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah governor. So they came to Gedaliah to Mizpah, namely Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, and Johanan the son of Kareah, and Sariah the son of Tahumeth, the Netophathite, and Jaazaniah the son of the Maacathite, they and their men. Then Gedaliah swore to them and their men, and said to them, do not be afraid of the servants of the Chaldeans. Live in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will be well with you.
All right. Well, here's a bunch of names that also only show up in like Jeremiah, so we won't go super in depth into this, so we don't steal any Sean's thunder whenever we go through Jeremiah later. But what happens here?
Nebuchadnezzar appoints a new governor.
Yeah, not even a king.
Not
right?
a king.
Yeah, just a governor.
No more kings.
Yeah, which basically communicates this is no longer a nation; it is just a province. Yeah, so it's kind of like the equivalent of, like, since we're more familiar with the New Testament, like after the death of Herod the Great under Rome, eventually his kingdom was split to like 4 different like of his like relatives and stuff. And originally there was this guy named Herod Archelaus who was ruling over the land of Judah, like Judea. That's actually why Jesus and his family moved up to Nazareth, because Herod Archelaus wasn't much better than his dad. But eventually the Romans get rid of Herod Archelaus, and they put, like, not Pontius Pilate, but the equivalent, like a Roman prefect, a governor, in the land instead. And basically that is them communicating, oh, we're in charge now. Right? It's like, we tried to let you have your own kingdom, but you didn't play by our rules, and therefore we're, like, you don't even have a kingdom. You just have, like, a governor in charge. So that's what's happening here, too. So after the people who were left in the land of Judah, which isn't many, right, whom Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon had left, he appointed Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, over them. I don't know who this is. He's mentioned in Jeremiah and stuff like that, but I would imagine that the reason why he goes into so much detail about some of these people is probably because the audience that he's writing to does know who these people are. Because keep in mind, they're not as far removed from this as we are. Right? For us, we're like, who the heck is Gedaliah son of Ahikam? Well, for them, they're like, oh, that was the final governor of the land. That was like the dude who was in charge of the land whenever we were exiled. Then all the commanders of the military forces, they and their men, heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah governor, so they came to Gedaliah to Mizpah, namely Ishmael son of Nethaniah, and Johanan the son of Kareah, and Sariah the son of Tanhumeth, the Netophathite. These are all weird names. And Jaazaniah, Jaazaniah, okay, it's a funny name. Jaazaniah, son of Maacathite, they and their men. Alright, so where did they come meet him at? Mizpah. Anybody know why that place is relevant?
Definitely came up a few times in like Judges and Samuel, I think.
Yeah, it shows up in Genesis, Joshua, Judges.
Isn't that where like Saul was announced as king?
Yes. That's why I was checking. Because it shows up in people like, I think the place where it gets most relevant is in Samuel. I was checking the other ones. I believe...
There was like a council of elders meeting in Judges, I believe.
Yeah, so Genesis 31 is the first place it shows up, and I'm pretty sure that's when Jacob and Laban are like making their truce to like kind of get away from each other. And,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You know, like,
Maybe
like,
like pursues him.
yeah. Next place it shows up is in Joshua 11, and like that's like just like proclaiming like the different borders.
Yeah. So it's got like a significance to Israel's history as far as like the division of
the land and making covenants and stuff. But then they would assemble, like so Judges chapter 20, they all assembled at Mizpah.
it's kind of like a place where covenants are made.
Yeah, it's like basically a meeting place where covenants are made and like very significant political choices are made. Because in like Judges 20, basically like that's where they meet up after they basically almost wipe out the entire tribe of Benjamin.
Yeah.
And they like get together, they're like, we kind of screwed up and we almost like wiped out one of our tribes. We need to fix this. And they're like, oh, okay, well let's just like have them go kidnap some women. It's like, oh, that's not a better solution. But yeah, Judges was a messed up time. And then 1 Samuel 7 was the people when they asked for a king. And God says, just give them what they asked for. And so Samuel gathers them all together and warns them, just so you know, like this is probably the most significant one. That's why I wanted to look it up. He warns them, this is what kings are going to do. If you appoint a king, they're going to take from you. They're going to make your economy absolutely terrible. They're going to become tyrannical, and eventually you're going to be destroyed. Well, here we go. Now we have a governor instead of a king, and the people are coming up to him at Mizpah. And they're like, hey, so... they're like, so, Samuel was right. They come to him. Then Gedaliah swore to them and their men, and said to them, do not be afraid of the servants of the Chaldeans. Live in the land, and serve the king of Babylon, and it will be well with you. So, how does Gedaliah respond? What does he tell them? Submit.
This is our punishment.
Is this good advice or bad advice?
Good advice, actually.
It's good advice. This is you wouldn't think it'd be good advice, but it actually is. This is what Jeremiah is going to tell them too. He's just going to say, submit. When you get to Jeremiah 29, that is his message, right? He says, hey guys, seek the welfare of Babylon. And that's actually, I'm actually excited to go into some of the next following books, like whether it be Jeremiah or Daniel, stuff like that, because I think that application-wise, we're going to have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. Because while the situation is different, right, you're going to have the Jewish people living as slaves in Babylon. The thing that's similar to us is that you've got the chosen people of God living in a nation that is not, actively promoting their values, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be interesting to read through those books and reflect on it from that perspective. Like, how do you live faithfully to God in a nation that has corruption and is filled with all sorts? Honestly, this last week has just served to reinforce the fact of me. It's like, oh, we've got some weird values that we need to work on. And so I think the next few months and stuff as we go through these other books, there's going to be hopefully a good discussion that happens here. But anyways, what Gedaliah says here, that is surprisingly the thing they're supposed to do. Don't be afraid of the servants of the Chaldeans, right? Being afraid of them is not going to help. They might kill us. Yeah, you're right, they might. But don't be afraid. Live in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will be well with you. Obviously, there are boundaries to this, right? If the king tells you to stop praying to God, no, keep praying to God. Be thrown into the lion's den, right? If the king tells you to bow down before his golden image, no, get thrown into the fiery furnace, right? And so we'll see that in Daniel. But by and large, serve the king, right? And this is something that the New Testament will reinforce as well. Submit to all authorities because they're placed there by God. And if you're under this authority, well, God's got you there for a reason, and your job is to be faithful to God while also serving the people above you. Even if that culture is actively promoting wrong things, you've got to figure out a way, and it's difficult, but you have to find a way to be faithful in the midst of a world of corruption. And it's not easy. I mean, that's gonna be the struggle whenever Jesus shows up in the Gospels, because like you've got the Jewish people, and none of them can agree how to live faithfully to God in light of the Roman presence, right? It's like, okay, like the Essenes are like, we're gonna escape into the wilderness, and we're not even gonna be part of this world system. That's not the solution. The Sadducees are gonna be like, well, you know what? We want power and influence, so we're just gonna sacrifice our values and just compromise, and like that's not the solution either, right? And so this is like every single generation of God's people has to wrestle through how to be faithful to God in the midst of a corrupt world, and it's not easy. But that's why we get to talk about it, and it can be fun. Anyways, this is the end of the chapter. Let's read through 25 and 26 first, and then we'll go through the other verses separately.
But it happened in the 7th month that Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, of the royal seed, came with 10 men and struck Gedaliah down so that he died, along with the Jews and the Chaldeans who were with him at Mizpah. Then all the people, both small and great, and the commanders of the military forces arose and went to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldeans.
Alright. So, what happens there?
Someone didn't listen.
Somebody did not listen. How do we feel about this person?
Stupid.
Stupid. Why?
Because he legitimately, like, he basically took the one hope of goodwill and comfort that the Jewish people had in Babylon and killed it, and then fled. Which is like the worst thing you can do in this situation, because you're facing a force that is already so great that you know you can't, like, surmount it on your own. So you take the coward's way of, you know, I'm going to send a message that I don't agree with this person by getting rid of them, and then I'm going to flee, because that's about the only thing we can do.
Sorry, as you were saying that, this sounded like relevant to, like, I'm going to murder somebody because I don't agree with. Sorry, that's just. I was like, I've heard people say that a lot this last week, but
no, it's
yeah.
it really is just like, I think there is a lot of application to like the, you know, rise in political violence that we see nowadays, where it's just like, you can. This is something that Charlie Kirk like preached, is that you can have an open discussion with people you disagree with and be civil about it. And that's how discourse should be. It shouldn't have to result in acts of violence that, you know, people end up dying from just because you don't agree on how certain things should go. And it's like, if you didn't want to live in Babylonian captivity because it hurts your pride or whatever, the solution to that is not to kill the person you were opposing and then flee. It's like, just run away. Try. You don't have to like kill the appointed governor by Babylon to do that.
Yeah. Well, and it's also worth pointing out, it's kind of tied to what you're saying. The reason why the whole Charlie Kirk thing is so surprising to us is not because this is the first time in history stuff like this has ever happened. It's more because it goes in direct contradiction of like what the goal of American democracy was to begin. Like, because acts like what happened with Charlie Kirk, that happens like all the time in like a lot of other nations, like on a daily basis. Like, it's not unheard of for like political movements to end in violence, right? And we've seen this happen a lot. Like, I mean, like if you look throughout 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Samuel, like a lot of times if you kill a king, you just take his place, or like that's like actually the path to power. And so right here we see something very similar happening. It's like, oh, I disagree with your opinion, I'm going to kill you. That wasn't unheard of. The reason why we're so shocked by it nowadays, like in America, is because like, oh wait, the whole reason, like, America's not a monarchy. It's like supposed to be like a public democracy. Like we're supposed to be able to talk about these things and it not result in violence. So that's why people are so shocked up. It's like, oh, like the reason why people are shocked is because like, oh, it almost seems like this is like a death blow to the nation. It's like, oh, this is not a good sign for where America is headed, because like that's like a pretty foundational principle of our nation was just kind of like assassinated, like, because literally you've got this guy who's literally just trying to have civil discourse, and like it's like, uh-oh. So it's not that what happened there's unheard of. It's just like, oh, it violates like what our nation kind of stands for.
Yeah.
And so for Judah, I would actually argue that they started violating what their nation stood for a long time earlier. And so we would be lucky if America lasts as long as Judah did, right? Because like Judah, they started violating what their nation stood for before they even became a nation. I mean, literally Moses is up there receiving the law, and they're worshiping a golden calf. These events right here, they're taking place like 800, 900 years later. If America lasted another 800, 900 years, I would say that's actually pretty solid. I don't know if that's going to happen. Hopefully Christ returns before then. But yeah, so basically, Gedaliah told them, submit to Babylon and just serve them. And the prophets would agree with him, right? It doesn't sound good, but that is what the prophets would agree with, right? And it's very similar to Jesus saying, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, right? If God has put these people in charge of you, submit to them and serve them, unless they're calling you to do something that directly disobeys God, right? Give to Nebuchadnezzar what is Nebuchadnezzar's. But it happened in the 7th month that Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, the royal seed. I'm assuming that means he's descended from David in some way.
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I don't know who this guy is, but I guess he's somehow related to David. He came with 10 men and struck Gedaliah down so that he died, along with the Jews and the Chaldeans who were with him at Mizpah. So this is born, I'm assuming this movement is just like an extremist movement born from some faulty sense of national pride. Right? The idea is like, no, we are the Jewish people, we are the chosen people of God. We will not submit to the pagan oppressors. But if they listened to the prophets, they would have. And instead, out of their patriotism, they're murdering their fellow Jews. And they're being violent against the Babylonians, which should tell you that they're not walking in obedience to God, because they're embracing violence and they're taking vengeance into their own hands, which goes against all of God's principles. Right? There was something else I was going to say about that. What was it? Like, I was going to say something like, I was going to give like an applicational spin. Oh, I think I was just going to highlight how sometimes we can be blinded by our own biases to where we think like, where we read the Bible through the lens of what we want to be the case. Like, there's plenty of people who they're like, oh, like, if you talk with them, their interpretation of Scripture always works out in their favor. To where it's like, oh no, God would never tell me to do this because that is not beneficial to me, right? And even whenever it comes to how we submit to authorities, as Christians, we don't do it perfectly, right? Like I've talked about how I did this with COVID. Like, I think I was far too quick to not listen to the authorities above me because I was like, I think they're being stupid. And like, and also like, it's easy for us to justify because it's like, technically, we're not in a monarchy, we're in a democracy. And so technically, we should be able to make our, like, it's very easy to start justifying things rather than submitting. And we have to be careful with that as Christians because the Bible doesn't call us to go be independent people who just do whatever we want. It calls us to submit to the authorities God has put above us. And like, while this is a very extreme case, there have been plenty of Christians who have done very extreme things in the name of God and rebelled against authority because they wanted to make life more convenient for themselves, right? A controversial one that we could talk about, which, like, it's literally how our nation was founded, is people rebelling against the authority above them because they wanted to make a life for themselves. And personally, I'm grateful they did it because it's made life really convenient for me. But from a biblical perspective, it's hard for me to be unbiased in this because obviously, like, I'm really grateful for the nation that we live in. But it's hard for me to look at that and say, like, was what they did morally justified from a biblical perspective, right? Like, should they have rebelled? Like we literally celebrate the war for independence. But it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't have a clear answer for that because I wasn't there and I don't have a good enough, like, understanding of history. I probably should pay more attention in American history class and probably should do more research.
Well,
but to me, it's just...
So, the interesting thing about the revolution and stuff like that is, like, the whole reason they were rebelling against the British government was literally just because the British government decided that to start treating them like colonies. have had plenty of independence for a while now because Britain's focus was on other stuff. They weren't really being taxed like colonies. They weren't, they were having resources pulled away from it, but they were receiving something in return. So when the British government started taxing them in the wake of the French-Indian War, which a lot of it took place in America, and the British economy was affected by it, they turned to the Americas and was like, oh, this is a great source of revenue for the kingdom because there's plenty of wealthy landowning people here. They're making crops that are profitable, so we're going to tax them. And the people of America were like, you haven't been doing that for 200 years. Why are you doing it now? And they're like, because we can. And the American people were like, no, we don't want you to.
Yeah,
and
but
they basically started.
but my main point in all of this is that as Christians we have to be careful, right? Because while what Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, did here seems extreme to us, he literally got up and he killed a person. The motives for him doing it was, as best we can tell, a sense of probably devotion to God, where he probably thought, this guy is calling us to compromise, but God has called us not to. When in reality, if he'd listened to the prophets were telling him the same thing. The prophets were saying, submit, this was a decision from God, and it was an act of judgment against you. So he should have submitted to the judgment, but instead he actually killed the very person who was telling him the truth. And in that way, he kind of sounds like the Apostle Paul, right? Who was going out and killing people who he thought were speaking blasphemies, when in reality they were the people of God. So that's something, it's just worth considering because we see a repetitive theme of that, right? People who are so blinded by their own prejudice and biases that they actually oppose God while they think they're serving Him. Then all the people, both small and great, and the commanders of the military forces arose and went to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldeans. That verse right there is where the author of Kings makes it pretty clear that these people were in the wrong. Because where do they flee to? Egypt. Which, if you're just, if you're somewhat familiar with the history of the Jewish people, if you're fleeing down to Egypt, what does that probably say?
You're not doing very good job.
Yeah, they literally are returning back to, congratulations, you literally undid the Exodus.
What's funny about this is the Chaldeans are in possession of Egypt at the time. I'm pretty sure their empire encompassed Egypt.
Yeah.
So it's not even like they're fleeing, really.
Yeah, well, they're just fleeing to get away from they don't want to go to exile, so they're just forming their own community somewhere else where it's hey, we won't be a problem down here. I'm assuming, I haven't looked into this, I'm assuming this is where they probably established, Alexandria, I know there's a very, heavy Jewish population in Alexandria, a few hundred years from there. I don't know if this is where it came from, I don't know. But by the time you get to, New Testament time period, there's, a huge population of Jews down in Egypt, which is why Jesus can go down there whenever he's, fleeing from here to great. But yeah, so the fact that they're going down to Egypt and being afraid of the Chaldeans, it just lets you know that their priorities aren't right because, they should trust in God. But if they trusted in God, they would submit to Babylon and they would trust that God would preserve them anyways, right? So
it kind of reminds me of when they first went into the wilderness and they complained and they weren't trusting in God to provide for them.
Yeah.
And they said that they wanted to go back to Egypt.
Yeah. And so now they finally did. So it took a few hundred years, but they finally returned. All right, and so verses 27 to 30, the reason I wanted to treat these separately is because while 2 Kings ends on a very negative note, it doesn't end on an altogether negative note. Verses 27 to 30 are actually going to be this glimmer of hope. It's almost it's actually comparable, I guess you could say, to the Gospel of Mark, to where, technically there is an extra ending to the Gospel of Mark. We don't know if it's original or not. But most likely the way that the Gospel of Mark originally ended was literally the women coming across an empty tomb and the angels proclaiming, hey, he's risen. And then they're afraid and they go run away to tell people and then it just ends. And that's how I feel about 2 Kings, where it's it doesn't give you enough to be yes, this is awesome, but it's enough to be oh wait, the story's not over yet. Right? To where it's there's a glimmer of hope. It's if you ended at verse 26, you were dead and buried in the tomb, there is no light, it is all darkness, things are bad. But then verses 27 to 30 kind of give us a little faint light shining in the darkness where you're wait a second, if I follow this tunnel, there might be daylight at the end. Right? So, Sean, could you read those verses for us?
Now it happened in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month. That's Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he became king, lifted up the head of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke to him good words, and he set his throne above the throne of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim changed his prison clothes and had his meals in the king's presence continually, all the days of his life. And for his allowance, a continual allowance was given to him by the king, a portion for each day, all the days of his life.
Well, that's cool. So what happens in these final verses?
I think it's very ironic that his name is evil, but he does a not so evil thing.
Yeah. Evil-Merodach. Ooh, he must be bad. Actually, he's kind of decent.
That's big guy.
Yeah. But what happens here?
So we find out that Jehoiakim is alive in prison in Babylon after he had been taken there. And he essentially gets elevated by the king of Babylon to a place in like his, like, it's one of the highest honors you can have in the kingdom to be able to eat with the king, because it's kind of like, oh, he kind of essentially values you the same way he values his family.
Yeah.
Like those were the people, and his whoever else was eating with him at the time.
Is this similar to what David did with Mephibosheth?
It reminds. So I think there's probably two stories that you're supposed to be thinking of here. I think one is David and Mephibosheth, which we'll talk about in a second. And then what other story might I be thinking of? A person in prison who is lifted and elevated to a high status. Joseph, yeah. Keep in mind that we just read about Egypt in verse 26, and then all of a sudden we hear about a guy in prison who's being elevated to a high status. I think we're supposed to think of Joseph as well. And I think, again, emotionally speaking, both of those stories are very relevant. Right, so we'll talk about those again in a second when we get to the a little bit to the end there, because I think there will be a nice little segue into like some applicational stuff. But let's just talk about what happens. So it happened in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he became king, lifted up the head of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from prison. All right. So what happens there?
Freeze him.
You freeze him. Yes. What's the language it specifically uses?
Lifted his head up.
Lifted his head up. Whenever you hear that language, what do you think of? What's that?
I said promoted.
Being promoted. There's one particular passage in Scripture that's coming to my mind. Let me make sure that the language is actually there. I'm pretty sure. Where's that?
All I can think of is with Cain.
That's what I was thinking of. Yes.
Okay,
So what happens there?
Well, that's when his face is downcast, and then God tells him, like, why are you angry? If you do what is right, will you not be lifted up?
Yes. Yeah. So that's what I was flipping to right now. But for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. So his face fell. Right. The idea is that he had like a shadow covering his face because he was like angry. Then Yahweh said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen?" Right? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? Will not your face be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is lying at your door. Its desires for you, but you must rule over it. Right? So to me, that's the language that if you keep in mind all these different allusions here, I think you'll get a grasp of what, theologically speaking, the author of Kings is trying to leave us with. Right? So whenever you think of a person's face being fallen, you think of Cain. Right? And the reason why Cain's face has fallen is because sin is ruling over him. Right? In the same way, the reason why Jehoiakim is in prison is because sin had basically the people of Judah had allowed sin to rule over them. Right? In Cain's story, what was the end result? Did he have victory over sin?
His brother.
Yes. Right? Immediately after God warns him this, he goes and kills his brother. He does a worse thing, and he is cursed by God and sent to wander the land. It doesn't end well with him. But with Jehoiakim, I want to say Jeconiah, same person. With Jehoiakim, how does his story end?
He actually ends up getting treated well.
His face is lifted up. But what's interesting is that, do we see any moment right here with Jehoiakim where he actively repents? It doesn't tell us that explicitly, and it might be implied. But the point that the author is teaching us is that God is not done with Judah, right? With Cain, his face stayed down, like cast down, and so God ended up going another way, and he went through Seth, right, the other son of Adam and Eve, right? But God is not going to abandon Judah, right? And so even though Jehoiakim's face was downcast, God lifts it up, right? And he does it through the pagan king, right? He does it through the very people who went to destroy them, right? Also, this might be a stretch a little bit. It says this happened in the 37th year of the exile. The main reason I highlight this, again, it might be a stretch because we've been hearing about a lot of years at this point, but since I'm going to highlight Joseph again in a second, I want to highlight that Joseph was elevated to his high status in the 30th year, and then there was a famine for 7 years. There was plenty for 7 years, and then in the 37th year of his life, the famine began, and that's whenever he was able to provide for his family to survive. So I just want to highlight, there could be like a parallel there. It's like, because it says it was during the 37th year of the exile, right? So it's not the 37th year of Jehoiakim, it's specifically 37 years of exile. So to me, like that kind of highlights, maybe there's a significance to the number there. We know that the exile is 70 years, so this is just over halfway, right?
Well, it's actually, it's the 37th year of Jehoiakim, where
he was exiled for 37 years. What? Yes. Well, no, but I'm just saying that it puts it in terms of the exile itself, right? So it's just saying in the 37th year of his exile, right? So it's not saying like the 37th year of his life or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. The 70 years that the Jewish people were exiled, was that starting with the first one or different?
People debate about it because whenever you do the math, like none of them land at exactly 70 years. It seems like the 70 is more of like the idea of like almost like a generation and a half, basically, if that makes sense. So it's not like there's not like a 2 dates where it's like, oh yes, this is exactly 70. It's like people will try, but there's not like a perfect one. But I just want to highlight that. So it's like, if you were to look at this like Joseph's life, the 37th year is whenever he is in the exact position to deliver his people from death, right? Which is kind of cool. All right, so Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he became king, lifted up the head of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from prison. People don't know, it doesn't explain to us why he did this. Some people speculate that maybe there was a Jewish person in the royal retinue of Babylon who might have been able to talk up the king. In which case that would be Daniel. Because whenever we get to the book of Daniel, we'll read that Daniel was elevated to a very high status. And so some people speculate that maybe Daniel was like, hey, my king's actually a pretty chill dude. He's kind of been suffering over there. Like, maybe lift him, I don't know.
There actually might be something significant that they don't mention. Jehoiakim actually doing anything to deserve this, because it kind of goes back to God taking charge.
Yeah.
So at this point, Judah has already they've already gone so far, and so at this point is God basically taking things upon himself, and so his act of mercy isn't really it's not really deserved. It's just him saying I'm having to do this myself.
Yeah. Well, and that's going to get to the one of the main takeaways I want to get us to is that God will always preserve a remnant, right? That is the promise throughout all Scripture, right? There's never a point in Israel's history where God says that all Israel will be faithful to Him. The idea is that even whenever Israel is faithless, God will always save a remnant through whom He will produce His blessings, right? And so here you have Jehoiakim, who, as far as we know, is the final true heir of David's throne. Right? Because keep in mind, Zedekiah was placed there by Babylon. He was Jehoiakim's uncle. He's not the seed of David. Jehoiakim was, though. Right? So here you've got the final son of David in captivity, and he's being elevated. Right? So the idea is David's family had been cut down to a stump, but something's beginning to grow from it. Right? To kind of go back to Isaiah's words. And so his face is lifted up, and he spoke to him good words. And he set his throne above the throne of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So the idea is that he's elevated to a higher status than the others. Whenever it says the other kings who were in Babylon, who is it probably referring to?
Other vassal states?
I'm assuming so. So even though the Bible is only really focusing on Judah, we've got to realize they were not the only ones who the Babylonians did this to.
Yeah.
The Babylonians did this to a lot of people, right? And so there are plenty of kings who were enslaved there. But in this moment, but Jehoiakim is being elevated above them. right? So he's being shown some extra favor. And he spoke to him good words, set him on the throne above the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim changed his prison clothes and had meals in the king's presence continually all the days of his life. So he's being treated like a royal advisor, or it's like a family member, which is crazy. Like this is like it's supposed to be it's a plot twist, right? Like if you end at verse 26, you're depressed. But if you read this, you're like, wait a second, what the heck is going on here? And the author is not going to explain it, and I think that's the beauty of it, right? It simply says, oh yeah, by the way, in the midst of all this exile, this one king was blessed tremendously, and he ended up dying happy. It's like, wait, what? And then the book just ends, right? And for his allowance, a continual allowance was given him by the king, a portion for each day, all the days of his life. Boom. So, new king comes into power. He elevates the king. He elevates Jehoiakim, and he's like, hey, by the way, from now on, you're no longer a prisoner. I'm actually going to treat you like one of my own family, and I am going to regularly give you money so that you have no want or need for the rest of your life. That sound good? It's like, yeah. So it ends on such a weird note. It almost leaves you unsettled because it almost sounds too good to be true, especially in light of all that you read before, which kind of goes back to the what you were saying, how like this is all depending on God. Mm-hmm. But you also mentioned Mephibosheth real quick. So tell us that story real quick, because if you detail Mephibosheth's story, I think we're going to arrive at a single word that will summarize the end of this story.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't remember what directly precedes the story, but basically by that point, David's on the throne, and pretty much all of Saul's family house is dead. And David basically starts the chapter. The chapter starts off with David saying, "Is there anyone left in the house of Saul that I can show hesed to, loving kindness to?" And so he learns that there is one person remaining from Saul's house, and he is like a cripple. And he goes and finds him, and the guy's afraid because he thinks that he might get killed. And basically, he says, "No, you can dine with like you'll be at my table." And so he shows Mephibosheth, like he exalts him, and actually shows him kindness. And he sits at the table with the king, and he's there.
Yeah, and if you go read the story, I mean, the whole point is that David wants to bless one of his enemies, which is weird. Like I don't regularly wake up and do that. Like I don't wake up and be like, God, I want to go find somebody who hates me, and I just want to do something kind for them today. Like, I don't do that. I am too imperfect of a person, and I don't think I know anybody who does that. But that's what David did. And David's a man after God's own heart. He wakes up and he says, you know that guy who hunted me down for several years and wanted to kill me? I want to bless one of his family members. He's like, is there anybody left? And they're like, yeah, there's like this crippled kid named Mephibosheth. He's like, sweet. Let's promote him. Let's have him eat at my table the rest of his life, and let's just treat him as like a brother. And you're like, wait, what? But that is a picture of God's love, right? David, a man after God's own heart, he says, I want to show somebody hesed. And that's how this story ends, right? In the midst of all this, right? Judah has become the enemies of God. And ironically, Babylon, the pagan nation, is walking in greater obedience to God than Judah. They don't know that, but they're at least doing God's will by destroying Judah. Yet in the midst of all this, God outpours his hesed. And he says, you know what? Judah might be my enemy, but I'm going to bless them. And so all of a sudden you have Jehoiakim being lifted up and treated as a brother. Which again goes back to Joseph, right? If you remember Joseph, he was like the opposite of this entire story, right? To where Joseph was the righteous sufferer, right? His brothers were the ones who handed him over to slavery, right? He did nothing wrong. His brothers sold him into slavery, and he was the one who suffered unjustly. He rose through the ranks of slavery, and he was appointed as the head of the household. But then his master's wife accused him of rape, and he was subjugated to prison. And then he rose through the ranks of the prison, and he helped some people out, and they forgot him. And then finally, eventually, he's delivered from all of his stuff, and he rises up to a point where that when his family is in need, they come to him, the very people who afflicted him, they come to him and he saves them. The reason why I think that's relevant is because if you read these stories in light of that, this story, Jehoiakim looks a lot more like Mephibosheth, right? The descendants of the enemy who are exalted just because of the endless love of God, right? It's almost like Psalm 23. It ends with David saying, surely goodness and hesed will follow me all the days of my life. That's what this is. But it also foreshadows what's to come with Jesus, right? Where there's going to be this greater joke. Like, the reason why Jehoiakim being elevated is so significant is because God is going to save the people through his seed, right? Eventually, through Jehoiakim, there will come a son, and through his son will come a son, and through his son will come a son, and through his son will come a son, and eventually there will be this greater Joseph figure. And he will be the righteous one who suffers on the behalf of Judah, right? Like Judah is going to betray him over to death, right? Well, both the people and also Judas, right? Like Judas is literally the same name as Judah, right? So Judah is literally going to betray him over to death, and he will die, but through his exaltation he will save the people, just like Joseph, right? And so the way that the story ends, it like foreshadows that, because it ends by showing, okay, even whenever the people are at their worst, God is going to do something to save them. And ultimately, it's going to pave the way for like, I don't want to take too many steps to like before I lose y'all. Ultimately, this story is not going to end here, right? The people are going to return from Babylon, and they're going to rebuild the temple, right? And this, like these few verses right here, they kind of give that glimmer of hope, right? God is not done with us. God has not abandoned his promises to David. There will be a future king who rules and reigns forever. The temple will be restored. And in that way, it foreshadows how in the future Jesus, the living temple of God, will also face destruction. He will also be torn down and be sent into a 3-day exile, and then he will be lifted up, and through that, the eternal kingdom will come. Right? I think that's kind of cool. Right? And so there's like this beautiful imagery there of like the Joseph Mephibosheth thing going on, and it just leaves us on a really hopeful note, so that if you are the people of God living in exile, you realize God's not done with us. He's faithful to his word, even when we are faithless. Which, application-wise for us, just so we can wrap things up here, what does that tell us nowadays? Obviously, we are not the Jewish people. We are not living in Babylon. But 1st and 2nd Kings was given for our own edification as well. What do we take away from this? What are we supposed to learn? Let me ask it this way, to maybe get us a step there. What are some timeless principles that we can find in here? What do we learn about God? What do we learn about humans? What do we learn about the chosen people of God?
Well, I guess it's kind of vague, I guess, but to go back to like Habakkuk, God's response to Habakkuk was that the righteous shall live by faith.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the same thing for us. Like, you know, there's still more to come in God's ultimate plan for mankind, and part of that is to realize that things are on his timing, and that in time he will bring things to full fruition, and so we have to just trust that he will do that, even if, you know, there are things like the exile, or you know, whatever it may be, tribulation or whatever, and so just learning to trust and live by faith.
Yeah.
As one thing.
Well, to go with that, in the moment, whenever you're living in history, it's often hard to perceive exactly what God's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, did Jehoiakim have any idea what was going on? Like, no. Like, he's just living in rebellion against God, and he didn't know what role he was going to play in this entire thing. We have the benefit of having this stuff being recorded in Scripture, thousands of years of people studying it, and we can study it in hindsight. Right? But for the people living in that time, they didn't understand what was going on. Right? The issue is that they just weren't listening to the prophets, and they weren't walking before God, right? They weren't living by faith, right? And the same is true for us, right? I have no idea what the history books are going to say about our culture 500 years from now, right? I don't know if anybody in this room is going to end up being mentioned in a history book. Maybe, maybe not. Mm-hmm. Our job, though, is not to know that. Like, we don't need to know those things. What we need to do is live by faith, and the way we do that is by doing what they failed to do. Right? They did not listen to the prophets. Well, what we need to do is we need to read the prophets, we need to read the scriptures, and learn from their mistake. We've got to recognize that God hates sin, and therefore, we should also hate sin. And if we don't hate sin, we've got an issue. Recently, me, Sean, and Nick are going to start going through this book right here. We were going to start going through it today, but Amazon didn't deliver it until about 20 minutes before we started. But the book's called The Mortification of Sin. It's from the 1600s. And the first point in this book is, like it's saying, how do you kill sin? It begins with an inward desire to hate it, right? Like, if you're never going to destroy sin in your life unless you absolutely learn to despise it. And despise anything that separates you from God. The people of Judah weren't like that, right? And oftentimes I think that we aren't either, right? I think oftentimes as Christians we're so comfortable in our sin that we don't fight it enough, right? We're very comfortable in like calling other people out on their sin, but when it comes to sin in our own lives, we're either too comfortable with it or we just have the wrong focus. Like, rather than depending on the grace of God and just like trusting that His grace is sufficient to cover us and just following Him, we get into this like head mindset of just like self-hatred where it's almost just as bad as like self-love. It's like we're taking so, like, we want so badly to be perfect that we lose sight of the fact that we just need to be faithful, right? And whenever we sin, we repent and we move on and we strive to live faithfully to Him. But we're not supposed to be like constantly beating ourselves up over it, because if we do that, we're still sinning because we're still not setting our eyes on Him, right? The whole point is that we need to hate sin, and the reason why you hate sin is by turning to Him. It's not by just being like, oh, like, you don't overcome sin by focusing on yourself. You overcome sin by focusing on God. And the people of Judah were not doing that, right? And so to go to the Habakkuk thing, the righteous will live by faith, right? It's not your job to understand exactly what God is doing in your culture at your time, right? There are a lot of people out there who will stand at a pulpit and they'll try to act like they do understand it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, right? All you can do is compare them to the Word of God and see if what they're saying holds up. Our job is not to necessarily understand that, though. Our job is simply to live by faith, right? And we can trust that even if things look bleak, like it did for the people in exile, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? We are living in the dark before the dawn, right? Things are going to get worse before they get better, but eventually Christ will sit enthroned. Things will be better. Just like the tomb was empty come Sunday morning, so too one day we will stand before Him and we will live with Him forever. That's really cool. But we're not there yet, right? Right now we are living in that middle ground. Any other things that y'all want to highlight? I know I talked a lot there, but that's because I wanted to try to find some sort of application. Any other things I want to highlight before we bring 2 Kings to a close?
I was going to say for this chapter, it's partially like a application that's more directly towards the original audience, but obviously also we can find ways to connect it to us. But after talking about the Mephibosheth story and like kind of just thinking more about the imagery going on here, like the idea of like eating at the table with a person also is the idea like peace, right? And if you go back to the previous passages, what did Gedaliah say was to have peace. Like, it was this call to have peace between in the land and that things would be well with you. And then later on in this, the very last thing that the Jewish people would have read is that there is a Babylonian king that is basically initiating peace with Judah. And so if you think about it, there is kind of this call to the audience to respond back with like peace too. Like it's kind of like calling them to continue having peace in the land, like if they're still in exile.
The story ends with it doesn't end with a person from Judah doing what's right. Mm-hmm. It ends with a person from Babylon doing what's right.
So it's like an invitation.
Yeah, that's true.
And I guess, like I said, I guess like that's more from the perspective of like the original audience, but like obviously that would still have like application for us too.
Well, or even for a relevant thing, and this is it's kind of tied to that. And we can close after this just because I'm tired. Y'all probably are too. But I'm trying to think how to word this correctly. It's important for us to recognize that, like, I don't think any of us in here have like enemies, quote unquote, like how the Babylonians were their enemies, right? But let's just say people who challenge us, right? God might allow those people in our lives to shape us, and oftentimes we don't consider that, right? Like oftentimes, like Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, I think sometimes our biggest concern is how do I get rid of all these bothersome people in my life, and we never stop to take the time to consider maybe God is using this person to shape me and produce greater godliness in me, right? So really, God sent the Babylonians to shape Israel, right, and to shape Judah, right? That naturally they didn't want that, right? Naturally they're like, we don't like the Babylonians, we want to destroy them. But God willfully chose to send them there to teach you a lesson. And so what they should have done is figure out, how can I seek God in the midst of this? And the answer would have been submit to them, which is probably the last thing they wanted to do. But in our own lives, that might be the case as well. And the reason why I was even thinking about that is actually in reference to the whole Charlie Kirk thing. I've seen so many people responding in all these different ways. And like some, like, a lot of it's mainly political, right? But I've seen Christians wrestling through how to respond to it as well. And I've seen different stuff, right? Where some on the worst end of things, I've seen some Christians being like, okay, the time for being gracious is over. It's time to take the fight back to them. I'm like, I don't think Jesus would agree with anything you're saying.
Yeah.
But I think that one takeaway I haven't seen, I think I've seen it from one person, is that really the best thing we should do, like, I think that what most people have been doing is that they have been using this as a moment to, like, they've been using the moment as an excuse to expose their enemies and say, now I see what's in your heart. But it's also possible that God allowed this to happen to expose what's in our own hearts, right? And maybe he's wanting to see how we will respond, right? And I think that that's probably a valid response. Like, how are we going to respond? Like whenever you go online, there are some people who are responding to this whole situation in very messed up ways, right? They're like, they're rejoicing and being happy, and I'm like, I don't care how much you oppose somebody, you shouldn't be celebrating whenever they're publicly assassinated, right? Like, that's pretty messed up. But, like, I know in myself, it's easy for me to get like disgusted by these people and be like, how could you respond this way? But really, I need to say, how would I respond to this? Like, if this person were to say this in front of me, how would I treat them in response? Like, would I be so focused on proving how much more righteous I am than them that I would just condemn them? Or would I find a way to respond graciously to them and find a way to sacrificially and lovingly serve them and recognize that they are just sinful people doing sinful things? You know? And that's just like a very practical example, but my whole point is this. God, like, whenever we face hardship in life, that is not an accident on God's part. He has allowed that to happen in our lives in order to not only demonstrate something about the world, but also to demonstrate something about us, right? And how we respond in those situations says something about us. We can respond like Gedaliah, we can respond like Ishmael, we can respond like Jehoiakim, and basically all of 2 Kings is different responses to hardship. And there's very few people who actually respond how God wants them to.
It's the testing of our faith.
Yeah. And we need to learn how to respond well, right? And so I think it's good to reflect on those things because, I don't know, I mean, a lot of y'all have had to deal with me complaining about, like, just even the last few months, like, different stuff, like, whether it be at my work or something like that. I naturally just get frustrated and be like, I can't believe these people did these things to me. Why are they being like this? And I just get annoyed. And I never take the time to think, well, you know what? Maybe God's allowing me to go through this because he's wanting me to grow through it and find a way to love my enemies in the midst of it. Instead, I'm just very quick to justify being frustrated at my enemies and pointing out all the ways they're wrong. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know, right? Like, our point isn't necessarily to point the finger and say, you're wrong. Our point is to say, okay, even if you are wrong, I'm going to love you, right? And so, I don't know. That's that might be like an application that's more general, right? Fortunately, we don't have people like the Babylonians who are, like, burning down our houses and stuff. But it's probably good to ask yourself how you would respond if they did. Would you immediately just, like, hate them? Or would you say, well, maybe God's allowed this to happen to expose something in my own heart? I don't know. Alright, anything else? I've talked long enough. I'm not talking anymore. Now it's up to y'all. Once, twice, 3 times. Alright, so there is 1st and 2nd Kings. Next week we will be... Oh, I'm so sorry, UP, I just woke you up. My bad, bud. Next week we're going to do an overview of Nahum. We're going to go through 3 chapters. Since it's one of the prophets, I think it'll probably be very applicational because it's just like calling out on stuff. And then we'll be going through Jeremiah, and that'll get us for like 12 to 15 weeks. So we'll figure out what we're doing after that. But I think we're going to Daniel. So I will close it out in prayer, and then y'all are welcome to hang out. Not as long as you want, but for a little bit. Lord, thank you so much for allowing us to be here today. I pray that as we depart from here, God, that we won't leave our discussion tonight here. I pray that you will help us hold on to the information that we talked about, but also, God, that you will help us reflect further on that information to be transformed by it, God. So that even though the stuff we're talking about seems so radically divorced from what we're currently going through in life, and the parallels aren't necessarily always abundantly clear, I pray that we will recognize that all Scripture was given to edify us and to help us understand your heart better and to go and live for you in life. So help us do that, God. Help us understand what you were doing with the people of Judah back then. Help us, help through that, help it expose our own hearts, and help us have a longing to be as close to you as possible, and then help us actually go and live that life out. May we be part of the solution this world needs, God. May your name be glorified, and may we be a good example of what it means to follow you in a world of bad examples. We love you, Lord, and we praise you. It's in your name we pray.